They heard the ground shake before they even saw anything. The sound was not of horses nor soldiers. It was as if the earth itself were alive, a bang, a rhythmic beat which made the air vibrate and the knees tremble. The centurions pressed their shields to their chests as if they wanted to protect their own hearts. Then he appeared, huge, impossible, a colossus of flesh and fury. The eyes were embers on a monstrous face, their fangs cut like spears. His body carried not only armor, but a symbol, the end of Roman invincibility. This was not an enemy, it was an omen. What Rome was facing at that moment was a creature from the sands of Africa, dragged up the mountain by a general who refused to accept limits. The republic that thought it dominated the world now trembled before a single animal. There was no training that prepared a man for that, neither tactics nor tradition. It was the birth of a new war, and Rome, for the first time, knew true fear. As crossing the Alps with an army was already an almost suicidal challenge, now imagine doing this with dozens of elephants, ice-covered trails, narrow cliffs, snowstorms cutting through the face like razors, and in between, giant creatures with heavy paws and dangerous fangs. That was Hannibal's folly, not just a military strategy, but a declaration of war on the impossible. While the Roman generals drew up plans based on logic and tradition, Hannibal bet on total surprise. His soldiers died in droves on the crossing. He lost horses, supplies, and almost life itself. But a handful of elephants survived, and that handful would be enough to etch his name into eternity. As the waterspouts cut through the silence of the Italian valleys, Rome's scouts rushed in panic. They didn't know what they had seen, only that they weren't humans, they weren't gods. They were giants, they were monsters, and they were coming. The Republic, so sure of its victories, was now about to face a war like never before, not just against Carthage, but against an idea that should never have become real. And if this story has ever made you imagine this scene as if you were there, so this channel is your place. Here, each video reveals the hidden side of the story, what the books don't tell and what the algorithms almost never show. If you value content like this, authentic, intense, and unforgettable, click on the like now and subscribe to the channel. Not only does this strengthen our project, but it sends a clear signal to YouTube. These stories deserve to be seen by more people. Don't leave it for later, you're already here. Be part of the legion that relives the past like no one else does. Comment: would I have faced Surus? Or not? Hannibal Barca was not just a commander. It was a living curse on Rome. From a young age, he swore before his father and the Carthaginian gods that he would never have peace as long as Rome existed. This oath was not symbolic. He lived by it. She breathed for him. And when he became a general, he turned hatred into strategy. Every step he took was a threat to Roman pride. Hannibal did not follow rules. He rewrote them all. It broke agreements, crossed borders, challenged geographies, and he did all this without fear. But what frightened his enemies most was his mind. He didn't just win battles, he shaped them. He chose the setting, the moment, the climate, and when his opponents realized they were already defeated even before drawing the sword. Elephants were more than weapons. They were symbols, colossal creatures that spread panic just by their presence. To Hannibal, they were the warning, I have come to finish you off in a way you never imagined. And he fulfilled that promise with blood. Rome was not just fighting an army. He was facing a man willing to do anything, a strategist who used his own impossibility as a weapon. And behind him, stepping slowly, came the beasts that would change everything. The Romans were used to cavalry, swords, spears, but nothing prepared them for what they saw that day. Hannibal's elephants were not just animals. They were walking fortresses. They had reinforced breastplates on their flanks, fangs decorated with metal, and carried turrets on their backs, where Carthaginian archers fired arrows from above, as if they were on movable walls. They marched in formation, obeying the shouts of the guides and the sound of drums that echoed like thunder. They had bells attached to their necks to spread panic by the sound before they were even seen. The psychological impact was immediate. Experienced soldiers froze, losing control of the formation, abandoning their shields, retreating in despair. With each step, the earth trembled. The sound of the pause was like a march of one's own destruction, and when they launched themselves against the Roman infantry, they crushed everything. Flesh, bones, shields, pride. They were living tanks, decades before any civilization dreamed of such a concept. The elephants weren't just part of Hannibal's army, they were his soul, in monster form. And his presence turned any battlefield into a horror theater. The gods seemed to have abandoned Rome, or perhaps they were just watching in silence. In the midst of that colossal troop there was one who stood out, a larger, more imposing elephant, with reddish fur and markings painted in black paint on the back. It was Surus, the last of the elephants to survive the crossing of the Alps. And it wasn't just any mount, it was Hannibal's own throne of war. Surus is said to have seemed to understand his master's soul. He didn't need to be guided, he moved forward, as if he knew where he should lead the terror. Together, man and beast have become a mythical sight on the battlefield. When the legionaries saw Surus coming in the distance, with Hannibal astride him like a god of war, hope was dashed before the first arrow flew. Surus was the symbol of Carthaginian resistance, of the genius folly of challenging an empire with impossible strategies. And for many, he was not just an animal, it was a ghost. A haunting that appeared at the most critical moments to spread fear, break lines, bury soldiers under heavy paws. Even wounded, even blind in one eye, Surus moved on. As long as he still marched, Hannibal would be alive. And as long as Hannibal was alive, Rome would never sleep in peace. The sun had not yet fully risen when Lake Trasimene became the scene of one of the darkest moments in Roman history. The fog covered everything. The legionnaires advanced in silence, not realizing that they were entering a trap. Hannibal had prepared everything, the terrain, the moment, the surprise, and fear. Suddenly, the muffled sound of hooves, then trumpets, and then the roar of elephants. The trees burst into screams. Carthaginian troops were coming, sides, but nothing caused more panic than the slow, crushing advance of the beasts of war. Surus was there, and his presence was like an eclipse of reason. Soldiers screamed without knowing where to run. The formation fell apart in seconds. Men threw themselves into the water trying to escape. Most did not survive. Many did not even fight. They were crushed, trampled on, suffocated by smoke and their own fear. The Battle of Trasimene was not just a military victory for Hannibal, it was a lesson. Rome was not invincible. Your generals, your discipline, your glory, none of this was valid in the face of a perfect ambush and an enemy who knew how to use fear as a weapon. And that day, Rome learned what it is to be hunted. The Romans were accustomed to fighting to the end, but in front of the elephants, many did not fight. They just gave up. Even before the first charge, there were those who trembled, those who cried, those who abandoned their position. The fear came not only from the size of the creature, but from the idea of being in front of something that could not be controlled, predicted, or even understood. Reports from soldiers say that just the sound of the bells on the elephants' necks caused despair. And when rumors ran through the camps that Hannibal was around with his monsters, there were panic outbreaks before the battle even began. Fear became a weapon, an invisible but devastating weapon, and Hannibal knew it. He used elephants with surgical precision, not only to open breaches, but to break the enemy's morale. The screams, the sound of paws crushing bones, the visual chaos of troops rushing in all directions, all of this became a spectacle that disarmed the Roman spirit. It was more than war. It was a horror theater, a war fought within the mind before it reaches the sword, and elephants were the main actors in this nightmare. Rome may have bled, but it was never to be forgotten. After the humiliating defeats, the generals knew that it was not enough. To train soldiers, it was necessary to teach ordinary men how to face monsters. The Republic began a new type of war, the war against fear. Specific training has been set up to deal with elephants, longer spears, rows with greater spacing, traps camouflaged with sharp stakes, and above all, emotional discipline. It was necessary to restrain the instinct to flee. Soldiers began to train to the sound of trumpets similar to those of the Carthaginians so that they would become accustomed to terror. Rome also studied the weaknesses of elephants, your eyes, your stomach, your guides. They knew that it was enough to injure the animal at the right point for it to go crazy, and sometimes trampling on one's own allies. It was cruel, it was cold, but it was Rome. It wasn't fast, nor easy. But little by little, the empire adapted, and when the legions returned to face Hannibal, they were not only better armed, they were more resistant inside. The fear still existed, but now there was something stronger, the memory of what had already been lost. Surus, the war elephant carrying Hannibal, disappeared in time. Perhaps he died in battle, perhaps exhaustion, perhaps alone in some distant field, but his name survived because he wasn't just an animal. He was the symbol of a lesson Rome would never forget. Even the most powerful empires must learn to fear. For centuries, Rome walked on, the ashes of defeated civilizations, believing it to be invincible. But Surus, with his colossal weight and terrifying presence, was the living reminder that no empire is above the unexpected. He personified terror, amazement, pain, but also the possibility of failure. And this possibility, no matter how much Rome tried to bury it in the official accounts, continued to haunt the backstage of history. When a general hesitated in the face of a new enemy, he remembered the days when monsters walked among men and Rome did not know what to do. Surus is not in the statues, not even in the monuments, but it lives in the echo of a time when Roman pride had to be silenced. Because at that brief moment in history, the largest empire in the world had to bow its head before an animal. Rome did not fall because of an elephant, but it was forever marked by what it represented. Surus was more than muscle and ivory. He was the face of the improbable, the cry of boldness, the strength that no military manual foresaw. And this is what changes the course of history, what no one expects. Hannibal used a living creature as a symbol of a new kind of war, a war where strategy fused with fear and where the impossible ceased to be fantasy. The crossing of the Alps, the ambushes, the bloody battles, all of this was just the backdrop for a larger revelation. Even the marble gods shudder when they are challenged by something they cannot comprehend. Surus did not survive, but Rome was never the same either. After him, the empire knew that it was not enough to dominate territories. It was necessary to always be ready for what came from outside, and often from within. Because the greatest dangers don't always wear armor. Sometimes they have fangs, thick skin, and a name that echoes through the centuries. And today, as we look back, we realize it was not only Hannibal who entered eternity, it was Surus, the elephant that made Rome tremble. If this content has already taught you something you had never imagined, if for a moment you felt inside this story, seeing Rome tremble before an elephant, so you've already received something valuable here today. And that's why I make a sincere request. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel. It's not just to strengthen our work, it's a way of saying this transformation was worth it. Because with each video, you don't just learn, You see the past with new eyes. And this can change everything. Your way of thinking, of reflecting, even of positioning yourself in the world. So give back that experience now. Click on the subscribe button, activate notifications, and come be part of this community that transforms information into real impact. Comment, I'm here because I want more stories that transform me.